So part F is an Excel workbook and it's macro enabled. However, none of the calculation formulas are based on macro functionality, and I'll go into details later about what those macros do. So depending on your operating system, I'm on a Mac right now. You will have a pop-up that asks you to enable or disable macros. And if you're on a Windows computer, this may appear as a ribbon within your Excel workbook. Go ahead and enable these macros. And if your IT security automatically disables macros, don't worry, that's fine. Like I said earlier, the functionality of this spreadsheet is not affected by macros. So now we'll get oriented to the workbook. So there are a total of 10 tabs that you can see down here. And the first tab is the Breakpoint Overview tab. This table shows the various bit isolate sets that correspond to your validation or verification, and the different antimicrobials, the reporting group, and corresponding 2023 CLSI breakpoints that are applicable to this workbook. So the next tab is the Summary tab. I will skip this for now and come back to it a bit later. But as we move over, you can see that there are two bit tabs for each bit set. And so the first one is going to be where you will enter in the accuracy data, while the second tab for each bit set is where you will enter in the reproducibility. So you will see many of the workbooks have this lock symbol next to them. That means they're protected. And throughout the workbook, there are various data validation rules, and there are various cells and sheets that have protections. And these measures are enabled to prevent common misclicks, such as inadvertent editing of cells that contain important formulas or cell references. These protections are there for the user's benefit, but it can be disabled without a password, and I'll go through that at the end of this video. So the first step in using this spreadsheet will be to enter in some data. So we navigated back to bit 1, and we'll pretend that we are using the bit 1 set throughout this video. So there's a lot going on in this sheet, but I'll help break it down for you. This sheet corresponds to the isolates found in bit 1 and the specific antimicrobials that are recommended for use with these isolates. So each drug has its own set of columns. So here we see ertapenem, this section's for meropenem, and you can scroll right and you'll see other drugs that can be used or are recommended for use with this AR bank bit set. So this top area here shows, again, the drug of these columns, the 2023 CLSI breakpoint, and it also provides you some information on the distribution of the category. So for this bit set, there are 21 isolates that are susceptible to ertapenem, with 0 intermediate to ertapenem and 10 resistant to ertapenem. And this right here is a button that that uses the macros, and we'll go into that a little later. And at the bottom of each column is a table that will aggregate some summary data for you, depending on how your test is performing. So you'll also notice that there are many colors and shadings. So you'll only need to worry about these orange shaded cells, and only these cells are editable, and this is where you'll be entering your information. All the other cells are read-only and have either data pre-filled in them or have formulas for various calculations. The light gray cells are where the AR Bank MIC information are already pre-filled for you. The white cells correspond to the data from the test system being validated or verified, and the dark gray cells are where calculations happen when your data is being entered. You'll also notice some isolates are highlighted in green, and those are strains that are recommended for potential reproducibility isolates. You don't have to test all of them, but these are recommendations from the AR Bank. So now let's start entering in some data. So starting at the left here, I can enter in the date tested, my initials, and then we'll go over here to the test data area. And this is where you'll enter in the MIC generated from your commercial system. And you'll notice that there are two columns for results. One is to record the sign, and the other is the actual number. And this is also how the AR Bank data is presented. The spreadsheets need these elements of the results separated so that the formulas here that will happen in these cells will work properly. And to help standardize the data entry and make sure that these formulas function properly, these cells have data validation rules, which means only certain values will be permitted into these cells. So the list of acceptable values are available in a drop-down. So if you click this arrow, these are the acceptable values. So if you want to put greater than, you select that appropriate sign. And that's the same for the MIC. So there's a drop-down list here for the various MICs. And this range should be wide enough for any test. So if I wanted to record greater than 8, I would select 8 here. So if you know the values, you can also just type them in. Now, if you enter in a value that is not within that list, you will get a warning. One thing to note about entering data here is if you are using a gradient diffusion strip, and you have an MIC that is in between these twofold log2 dilutions, then you will need to round up to the next higher log2 dilution. So if you have a MIC test strip that gives you a result of 0.75, then you'll want to round up to 1 here. Also, if you are validating or verifying a combination agent like piptazo, for the test MIC, you only need to enter in that first component. So if you have a result that is equal to 8/4, you only need to enter in that 8 component. So now we can see that some calculations have happened. We first see in this test data area that the isolates, 1, 2, and 3 have been assigned the test interpretation. So this is looking at the MIC data you enter here, comparing it to the breakpoints, and assigning a susceptible, intermediate, or resistant interpretation. Then if we take a look over here in the dark gray area where calculations for ertapenem, this area takes your test result and compares it to the AR Bank data and determine whether it's in essential agreement, so comparing the MIC to the MIC, how many dilutions away your test result is from the AR Bank MIC, and then it determines whether it's in category agreement. If you have a category disagreement, the type of error will display in this column, and it does all of that calculation for you based on the data that you entered. So now I'm going to continue entering in some additional data, and we'll come back and start looking at how the spreadsheet takes all of these results and aggregates them together. So now we have some test data entered. For ertapenem, we tested all 31 isolates. And as you can see, all of these calculations have data in them now. So you can see that we have one minor error here. So this is AR0007. The AR bank MIC is 2, which is resistant, versus your test system had an MIC of 1, which is intermediate. And any sort of disagreement for essential or category will be brought to your attention by red highlighting. And so now we can scroll down to this summary table, and it does some aggregate calculations for essential agreement, category agreement, and the various types of errors. And these calculations pull from these variables over here. And so you do not have to test every single isolate. So if you only wanted to test 15 isolates from AR Bank Bit 1, you can do that. And the summary table will account for that. So for meropenem, we tested 15 isolates, and we had a very major error here. You can see here the denominator is 15. So these calculations will account for when you don't test all of the isolates. And you don't have to test in any particular order. You can be very sporadic about which isolates you select, and the formulas will be unaffected. And you'll see that these variables here are filterable. So if you wanted to filter on a type of error, so I just want to see the isolates that gave me a very major error for meropenem, I can do that, and it will filter out this one isolate, AR Bank 1. So before going to the summary tab, I also wanted to show that I have entered in some other data for the Pseudomonas panel. So perhaps I'm validating or verifying some Pseudomonas and meropenem, and like for bit 1, I can test only 15, and 15 isolates will be displayed here in the denominator. And all the denominators here are accounted for, including the major errors and very major errors, where those denominators are dependent on the number of susceptible or resistant isolates. So now we've entered in some data for the bit 1 panel for ertapenem and meropenem, and isolates from the bit 3 panel for meropenem. So what if I want to see all of this data together? You can do that by going over to the summary tab. The summary tab pulls from those individual drug summary tables and presents them all together in this interactive table. So you can see that the bit panels are color-coded according to the bit tab, and these hyperlinks will take you back to the accuracy section. So if we click that, it takes us back to our ertapenem data. And so this pulls that from those summary tables, you see the number of isolates and, again, your aggregate data here on various lines. So we have meropenem here, and from bit 3 we have meropenem again. Essential agreement is not included in this table because for breakpoint verifications or validations, we'd really like to focus on that the new breakpoints can accurately call the categories. So we've tested meropenem for Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Enterobacteriales. So what if we wanted to see that data tallied together? So that's what this gray area does. For any drug where there are multiple reporting groups that are tested in this panel or in this workbook, it will take those and aggregate them together. So for meropenem here, we see that there's a total of 30 isolates. It's adding the 15 from Pseudomonas and the 15 from Enterobacteriales, and it does that for all the statistical calculations. This table can also be sorted. So if you wanted to see all of the meropenums more closely together, you can do that. So let's sort alphabetically. And so you can see here, you can look at the meropenem data from all the different bit panels and the combined row after row. So now we are going to enter in some precision results. So I've navigated to the bit 1 precision, and I'm going to look for ertapenem. So this box describes ertapenem precision testing results. Similar to the color coding for accuracy, these cells that are in orange are editable. Everywhere else, there's some sort of formula or calculation happening. So for ertapenem, and I'm going to zoom in a little, we can enter in precision results for the replicate testing for various isolates. The isolate and organism and initials and date tested fields are all free text, so you can enter in whenever you want here. The only cell that has data validation rules are these interpretation fields. So I'm going to go ahead and enter in some data. So we're going to take one of the recommended reproducibility strains, so AR001, a Kleb Aerogenes. I'm going to put my initials and the date I tested and my interpretation. I'm going to do that for all of my replicates, and I'll be adding in a couple of isolates. So I now have some test data for 3 isolates. I have AR0009, AR14, and I also chose to use a QC strain for reproducibility. And you can see the various interpretations here for the replicate testing over various days using separate inoculum preparations. And then if we go over here, I'll go through some of the calculations. So this column here takes these 3 data points for the row and looks for the most commonly identified interpretation. So here resistant was identified 3 times. And so this is the most common interpretation. And so we have an R here. And then these fields, result equivalency for the various replicates, will take its respective result and compare it to this field here. So result 1 will take the interpretation from result 1 and compare it to the mode. And it will do so for the same for 2, and then your third replicate. It will then take all of the data points and determine the percent that they are equivalent to each other. So here we have a pretty good precision study where they all match. Now, if we had one result that was, let's make this intermediate, you'll see here that this is unchanged because 2 out of the 3 times a susceptible interpretation was identified. But once you start comparing the individual results, you'll see that here, result 3, which is intermediate, is not equivalent to the most common interpretation of these 3 replicates. So that's why you'll see a no here. And then 8 out of the 9 of your data points are in agreement or equivalent to the mode or median. And so you have a percent here. 8 over 9 is 89%. Now we can go back to the summary tab, which also pulls those data into this table. So now we're looking at ertapenem, and I'll zoom in. This is the ertapenem row. We see that the precision reproducibility data has been put here. So we have 9 data points. It provides the overall equivalency and the number of equivalent. You can now take these results and put them in Part C, the bit summary template. I'll now go over how to clear or delete test data. There are 2 ways that you can do this. First, you can highlight results, your result fields, right-click, and do clear contents. If you try to highlight a cell that is locked, it will not let you do anything. So make sure you're only highlighting cells that are editable. But if you had filled up this workbook and you don't want to do highlight and clear contents for each drug, what you can do is use this button, which is actually a macro. And what this button will do is it will clear the contents of this entire range. So if I click this, it will give me a warning. So it will make sure that I want to clear all of the results. And unlike clear contents, this cannot be undone, and that is because once a macro is executed, the undo stack is cleared. So if I click yes here, all of my results disappeared. A downside to macros is that you can't undo. So I'm trying to get my results back and I can't. So please know that limitation of clearing your data, and that is a reason why the warning was put in the macro. If a good rule of thumb is to save this workbook to some cloud system where there is an automatic save and you can recover previous versions if you ever had to go back to data prior to executing a macro. On the Precision tab to clear data, there are no macros. So you would highlight all of your results, right-click, and select clear contents, and your results are deleted. We will now go through how to unprotect this sheet. Everywhere except the orange cells are not editable, but if for some reason you wanted to modify any of the formulas, you can access those. So to remove the protection from a sheet, you go to Review, Unprotect Sheet. There is no password, so you can now go through and do any editing or modifying you see fit. To re-protect this sheet, you just click Protect Sheet, and these are the default abilities that are set to this workbook, and you just click OK. No password is needed.